there's a conflict that is initiated between the French and the English, and most of this conflict happens in Europe, and it doesn't really happen in America until there's a clash in America that will eventually grow into a worldwide war. Okay, and the way that that works out is there's this. Well, first off, let me just mention, if you look at this map here, you'll see that the blue area is the British colonies, and the yellow area is the French colonies. The French colonies, the French Empire in America is very different from the English, because what happens in the English colonies is that people settle in these colonies and live there to start a new life, so to speak, whereas people in the French colonies are generally traders. So they don't really take over the land. They don't really start farms and stuff like that. What they do is they trade for goods, particularly furs, right? So there's a difference in the perception of what the land is based on whether you're French or English, because the English are looking at land as a livelihood, and the French are not really that concerned with the land as much as long as they can get their trading goods. All right, but there is a sense that there is a limit to the French and the English colonies, and there isn't any agreement on where that limit is, because when Americans got um, charters to settle these colonies in America, these colonies essentially started here on the Atlantic coast, and in theory, they went as far west as you can go. So the idea would be then that, like, Pennsylvania goes all the way to California, and Virginia goes all the way to California, although they didn't really know how extensive that was. There was a lot of this that wasn't really known at the time. The point here is that people in Pennsylvania then, or in Virginia, could say, well, we want this land, and the king gave it to us. And this land that I'm pointing to is the Ohio River Valley. So this river that you see right here is the Ohio River. And what's significant about the Ohio River is that it's a very um, it's very good for agriculture, right? It's a very fertile land, and the result of that is then that the English colonists, particularly in Pennsylvania and Virginia, want to move into this territory so that they can divide up the land and they can sell it. Okay, so so um, so I don't know how many of you guys have heard of George Washington, right? Who's George Washington? Come on.
Military commander and our first president.
Our first president, exactly, right? And he's also the guy on the dollar bill. Okay. And does anybody know very much about him? Do you know what his first job was? He was a surveyor. What does a surveyor do?
Marks out where property lines are, basically.
Exactly, marks out property lines. So what they did was there were expeditions that were sent from Virginia into this territory to survey the land, to mark it off. And why would they do that? Because they wanted to sell it, right? So George Washington's first job was to divide up this land so they could sell it, even though the ownership of the land was in question, right? So then later, there's going to be these tensions between the French and the British over the dispute about this land is going to get worse. And George Washington actually will lead a contingent of the Virginia militia into what is today Pennsylvania, and there will be a battle here, just a little skirmish, really, called the Battle of Jumonville Glen. And in that battle, the French ambassador will be killed. All right. Let me just go back here for a second and show you this painting here. This is actually a depiction of the battle where the Virginia colonists are sneaking up on the French, right? And the French ambassador gets killed, And that's going to cause the French to accuse Washington of assassinating their envoy, their ambassador, and the tension that is caused by that will eventually escalate into a worldwide war between the British and the French, right? So this little skirmish that was started by George Washington ends up creating this worldwide war between the British and the French. And the war is being fought in Europe and in the Caribbean and in Asia and in South America. And the war actually is not going well for the British. Okay. Um, and one of the reasons why is because the British really aren't spending a lot of attention on America. So one of the things that they do, the British Parliament will will basically instruct the colonists to come together and to come up with a plan for opposing the French in North America, right? That's why this great war for empire is called in America. That's called the French and Indian War, right? You guys have heard of that before, French and Indian War, right? That's because it's between the French and the Indians, right? Is it between the French and the Indians? Are we having a hard time waking up today? Come on, somebody tell me. Is it between the French and the Indians? Yes or no?
I don't think so. I don't quite remember, but I'm pretty sure it's not.
It's not. You're right, Danny. Thanks for speaking up. It's actually the French and the Indians on one side and the Americans on the other, although in theory it was the British, right? So the French and the Indians on one side and the British on the other, and the Parliament's telling the Americans, okay, we want you to come up with your own plan to defend yourselves. And Americans come together in Albany, New York, and they come up with a plan for mutual defense. But it actually was something that the colonies were reluctant to fulfill. And eventually the Parliament will reject the plan. But the main thing that comes out of this Albany plan is the idea that the colonies are so disunited that they can't really come together to defend themselves against the French, all right? And part of the reasons why is going to be because when you look, and I know this map is a little difficult to see, but most of the conflict is happening up here. So if you're down here, you don't want to get involved in that fight. It's got nothing to do with you. And this is far away, right? I mean, distances were just, these were incredible distances at that time, okay? So the southern states are like, well, why should we come to the aid of the northern states or the northern colonies? They've got nothing to do with us. They're a bunch of foreigners, right? Okay, so what happens then is that Britain will be forced to focus its attention on the North American colonies, and when they do that, it's going to turn the war in their favor. The British are going to be able to defeat the French in North America, which leads to an overall victory in this great war for empire. Another name for that war is the 7 Years' War. It was called the 7 Years' War. Why do you think they call it the 7 Years' War?
Maybe because it lasted 7 years.
Exactly. It lasted 7 years, right? So then you can see it started in 1756 and it ends in 1763 with the Treaty of Paris. And the outcome of the Treaty of Paris is that Britain gains all of this territory east of the Mississippi, with the exception of Florida, which becomes Spanish. And then all the territory west of the Mississippi is ceded to the Spanish. So the French lose their entire empire in North America through this war. And the French aren't going to forget this. The French are going to be very unhappy about having lost this major battle, this major conflict to the British and lost their empire in America.